Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope that you guys can hear me. Can I get some thumbs up so that I know that you guys can hear me? All right. So, thank you for confirming that. And welcome to the Security Best Practices for Salesforce Professional. And I'm here co presenting with my friend Doug. And before we deep dive into the subject, let's get the disclaimer out of the way. So, we are not a law firm, and whatever we are going to talk today is not a legal advice. And both Platinum 7 and Cloud Compliance, we are both Salesforce partners, but we are not Salesforce. So, everything you're going to hear today is just our point of view on this subject. Now that the disclaimer is out of the way, let's go with introductions. So, hi, my name is Rahul Gupta, and I am one of the co founders of Cloud Compliance. Cloud Compliance is a App Exchange ISV partner, and we are very focused on data privacy, uh, AI, and these are some of the large customers that we have today. And we are very fortunate that some of the really large brands have trusted us. I am a product guy, and currently I am building a AI product very similar to Salesforce AI Cloud. It's known as GPT-5, so that keeps me very, very busy. I'm always trying to solve complex problems using technology. I am based out of Minnesota. And I'm going to pass it on to my friend Doug. So over to you, Doug.
Thanks a lot, Rahul. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Lovely to meet you all. And as Rahul said, we are Salesforce partners. Platinum 7 um, started up a couple of years ago, and I focus purely on Salesforce security. I used to work at Salesforce for 13 years in the platform security space, and you're seeing on screen a couple of my blogs. So happy to chat with people afterwards. But during the event, if you could please ask any questions you have on the LinkedIn um, post, that'd be great, because that way we can actually see the questions and we can answer them as we go through. So without further ado, please move on to the next slide, Raul, and we're going to discuss a little bit about our agenda. So talk a little bit about the overview, talk about what data is at risk, and then we're going to go through points that we think you should be focusing on to keep your data safe. So it's a relatively simple thing to do, but security never stops. And so what we're going to be looking at here is making sure that your environment is secure and your data is safe. So let's move on to the issues that we're trying to protect against. From this slide, what you can see, oh, sorry, it got cut off the bottom right-hand corner. My apologies about that. You see a couple of issues here that have caused rather large fines. Now, this is people who have done incorrect things and either broken data security laws or personal information laws with breaches and that type of stuff. So T-Mobile had a big issue in the US. There's also challenging stuff with Equifax from a while ago. I think a lot of people were affected with that. I know that a couple of my colleagues were, which isn't great. And then on the bottom right-hand corner, what we're looking at here is the information from the Verizon breach notifications. And what we're looking at is that over 74% of breaches included a human element. So it wasn't necessarily just a hacker getting in. It was either an error in the system, a privilege misuse, so people raising their privileges to where they shouldn't be, or people having God rights when they shouldn't have God rights, for example, stolen credentials or social engineering. So a lot of stuff there was human involved, and then 83% of breaches were external actors. Now that sounds like a lot, but if you think the other way around, 17% were internal actors. So that's your internal employees. They're the ones that have access to all the data to do their job, and they have access to it right now. So it's very, very simple for them to take the data and run away. So having a good understanding of actually what data you have and what sort of value it is to you and also to the business is key. So when we look at now at the next steps,
So, Doug, I'm going to just take a pause here. I'm going to mute myself just so that there's no noise going on from my side, and then I'll be.
No worries. Thank you for that. Okay, so as I said before, security isn't difficult, but it is actually something which will never stop. And myself and the team at Cloud Compliance came up with this idea of having just these four simple steps where you assess your org health, you then look at securing your application, you secure your data, you improve security awareness, and the cycle continues because security never stops. And so what we're going to be doing is running through these 4 points during the session today. And if we move on to the first one, please, this assessing your org health is relatively simple. The Salesforce gives you a lot of capability there to actually help you with this. So the Salesforce Health Check, the Portal Health Check, Salesforce Optimizer, these are three free products that Salesforce have built into the environment to actually give you good information around how secure is your Salesforce environment. Now, one of the biggest threats I see for customers who have um, Salesforce digital experiences, also known as communities, is that you have publicly shared external objects. So you have maybe the account object is publicly shared to the external users, which means every external user can see all accounts. And you may think, oh, that's not common. In fact, it's more than 70% of my customers who've got communities had that issue. Not necessarily with accounts, but they did have publicly shared objects. So this is something which is key to keeping your data safe. And both the Portal Health Check, actually all three, the Health Check, Portal Health Check, and Salesforce Optimizer will give you information about which objects are shared publicly. And from that, you should be assessing why and maybe restricting that sort of information. Now, how do you get that information? How do you get an assessment of your org? Well, there's some, like I said, these three products are from Salesforce. They're free of charge. They're inside every Salesforce environment. So please use them. But also a bit of a plug for myself, I focus purely on Salesforce security and I do assessments for many, many customers. Over the last couple of years, I've done more than 75 assessments for different customers. And these customers have actually got a very, very good understanding of what the current security status is, what they should be looking at to change to make it more secure, and getting a good idea on what the capabilities are that they could be leveraging to enhance their status of security. Now, there's going to be some links afterwards, which I'll share, which include a data sheet on my assessments. But assessing your org health is key. Understanding what you have and what security you currently have is important. Then you can move on next to understanding what you should be doing with other parts of the environment. So if we look at the next slide, please. The next one we're talking about is securing your application. So if we move into that part, what we're talking about here is actually a couple of things to really secure your Salesforce environment. Now, in the breach information from Verizon, you saw that there was a lot of stuff being caused by credential theft. That's when people steal username passwords, or if you go to Have I Been Pwned, you can see that your username and password may have been stolen and used. And if you don't follow good password hygiene and you reuse your passwords, then that could be used to get into your version of Salesforce. Now, obviously, Salesforce not recently, about a year or so ago, enforced MFA, multi-factor authentication. This is the absolute bare minimum for making sure that your user access is secure. Using multi-factor authentication, either in your single sign-on environment or at Salesforce with the Salesforce Authenticator, that will basically negate the credential theft issue, because without your telephone and the multi-factor authentication number on that, you can't log in. So that's something which is very easy to implement. Salesforce has automatically forced it on you, but you can turn it off. And that's the challenge I find with some of my customers. Actually, they've turned it off for some strange reason. So um, I would suggest strongly looking at making sure that everybody uses MFA. And then the next option is to make sure that people are accessing your version of Salesforce from a corporate machine, not their own home machine, or not a machine on a public network, maybe like an airport Wi-Fi, for example, because these types of environments tend to be quite insecure. So there's a couple of features Salesforce has that are free and you can configure them appropriately about limiting access to your corporate IP address, which means you'd have to have a VPN. So all of your users would log into the VPN, they'd end up inside your corporate network, and then they can access Salesforce from there. And so that's what the first point is. The second one there is certificate-based authentication. This is where you hand out certificates to people. You hand out certificates to the devices, and then those devices will automatically be able to authenticate with Salesforce, which makes it really simple. On the next slide, we'll be covering a few other bits and pieces. So with that, configuration stuff is also very important. So securing your application, I mentioned it slightly earlier around the communities, but having public read write and public read is not good for external access. For internal access, the Salesforce well architected documentation suggests that public read is probably okay for most internal users, for most objects, but you should have private on some things like cases and opportunities and things to that effect. Remove the view setup capability from people unless they really do need it, because inside the setup area of Salesforce, there's a lot of information which shouldn't really be shared with lots of different people. So minimizing that can be quite powerful. You should also minimize access by connected apps. Now, what's a connected app? If any of you have used the Salesforce Workbench tool, or if you've used dataloader.io, that connects to Salesforce using your credentials, and that uses a connected app. The challenge with these connected apps is anybody can connect an app into your version of Salesforce. By default, Salesforce auto allows apps to connect into your version of Salesforce because it's easy and it makes things simple. However, I personally recommend customers should use the API access control feature in the setup area, which is not enabled by default. You have to actually log a ticket with Salesforce tech support to get the API access control enabled in your org. And then you've got to configure it. And when you do configure it, it means that you automatically will block any new app from connecting to your version of Salesforce. Just minimizes the ability for anybody to get things out of your environment. And talking about the breaches earlier on as well, a lot of it was because of having too much permission to see too much data. And so if you have users that have view all data or export reports or these types of things, or you have a lot of system administrators, you should really get rid of these, because these options really do increase the threat of extraction of your data and leaking this information. I've seen customers who've had 25, 30 users in their Salesforce environment, only a small customer, but they had 10 or 12 system admins. In my personal view, system admins should be a number trending towards 2, maybe 3, but definitely no more than 5, no matter how big your org is, because it's something that you shouldn't be having people that sort of God rights, too many. So moving on. Sorry, excuse me about that. Quick cough. So integration is another key thing where you have a lot of challenging issues. The majority of customers I see are using system administrator profiles to allow external applications to connect to your version of Salesforce. That's extremely bad, and I suggest that that's something you should definitely stop. So to do that, what you should do is use Salesforce's new integration user license, and you should minimize that to really shut down the ability for the external applications to get too much data. If you have an external application that needs to read opportunities and update them, but only update one field, let's say it's a shipping system. So you create an opportunity in Salesforce, it closes one, and then you ship it from the warehouse. The warehouse has to be able to say this opportunity, these objects have been shipped, so it needs to tick a box. And it needs also to know the shipping address. So what the external application needs is read access to the opportunity object, update access to the shipped field, and read access to the shipping address field. That's it, nothing else. So why have you given it system admin rights? That's the key thing I ask a lot of my customers. So really minimizing what it does is key. You should also have a separate user for each integration. And in the old days, that was very expensive because Salesforce users aren't inexpensive. They're quite expensive licenses, as we all know. Very, very capable, very powerful, but quite expensive. So what Salesforce have done recently in the last year, actually at last Trailblazer DX, which is coming up very soon. Um, a year ago, Salesforce actually gave every Salesforce customer, enterprise and above, 5 integration user licenses. So you can use now these licenses to allow external applications to connect to your version of Salesforce. Um, and these licenses are actually quite inexpensive. If you need more of them, then they're only about $120 per year US for an extra license, which is very inexpensive compared to what we used to have to pay for a full license. So I would strongly suggest that moving your integrations to the new system integration user type and having a separate user for each integration, because that way you know exactly who did what to your Salesforce environment because it's actually logged as a particular user. It also means you can really restrict access to exactly what that particular application needs and no more. And then lastly, don't give user ID and password credentials to external systems. What you should be using is the JWT OAuth flows. Now that's something which is a bit more challenging to build as a developer. However, it's much more secure because you control it via connected apps, and it's what I use for all my applications that connect to Salesforce for my customers. Okay, so then moving on from application security, if we're looking at the best practices I mentioned here, this is actually something which, because we are speaking about this integration, this is a good place to actually make sure that we have some information on this. And this is just some documentation for you. There is actually a change in the most recent release in the spring. Salesforce have actually changed the default profile of this particular user because accidentally, when they released it last year, they gave the restricted profile access to all custom objects, which isn't what you want. So that's now been fixed. So in the spring release is another profile which you should be using for that. So this is a nice documentation for you after the event, so you can have a look at this and follow through and see how you can use that appropriately. So on the next slide, we're going to be talking about some other parts of your application itself. So with your application, if you write code, because humans make mistakes, it's probably best to see if your code has got issues with it. The hang on a second. My apologies. I'm just trying to get my picture out of the bottom right, put it at the top right, so you can start reading all the slide information. So hopefully we can move my picture. But what I'm talking about here is with your code, Salesforce gives you a option to actually use check marks, which allows you to check your code for any code issues. So have you done bad things in your code? Because humans can put bugs into things, as we all know. So it's always best practice to use check marks or Salesforce's scanner, and the links are there for you. Actually, we're giving you a PDF at the end of the presentation as well, which has got all this data as well. So you don't need to write it down, don't need to copy it, but it is going to be available to you. So check your code because socket injection and stored cross-site scripting are two serious issues that are put into code because developers don't do the right thing. So you should be looking at your code to make sure it is correct. There are more scanners out there, not just checkmarks and Salesforce is one, but there are others out there as well. You may actually have them built into your DevOps process. So tools out there like Capado, AutoRabbit, that type of stuff. DigitSec do a very good code scanner. So there are different tools out there to help you with this, but these tools should be used regularly to make sure that your code hasn't got any issues with it. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to be discussing a few other bits and pieces around your capabilities that Salesforce actually have to keep your data safe. These two features are paid. This is part of the Salesforce Shield suite. You do not need to buy all of Shield. Shield's a brand. So if you buy Shield, you're going to get 3 main products: platform encryption, event monitoring, and field audit trail. So with event monitoring, I believe that every customer should have this because it's the only capability which enables you to see exactly what's happening inside your Salesforce environment. So you can tell that Doug logged in at 9:15 in the morning. He then went to this particular account, looked at these particular cases, and then went off and ran a report about this. He then wrote a report about all the opportunities in the system, ran it, exported it, but didn't save it. That to me sounds like a bit of a dodgy process. So having the ability to understand exactly what's happening inside your Salesforce screen, sorry, in Salesforce environment is something I would strongly suggest you need event monitoring to help you with, because understanding what is going on is key to understanding is your data safe, because you can now track and see what people are doing. It's also got some great capabilities for business as usual as well. So you can say your system's not performing appropriately. It'll tell you the page response times. It'll tell you other things around that. So it's a good for business as usual. It's excellent for security. And also, you can see exactly what pages you are using. So if you've introduced a new capability to your version of Salesforce, you can see if people are actually using it. And if they're not using it, you can then maybe educate them on they should be doing things in a different fashion. So I think that the event monitoring product is really, in my opinion, mandatory because it gives you good information about what's going on. But the last point on this slide is something which is extremely powerful. It's part of event monitoring. It's called transaction security policies. And what it enables you to do is take policies that you write and stop bad things from happening to your Salesforce data. So inside your call center, all of your customers, sorry, all of your call center representatives have access to all of your customer data because if they don't have access to all the customers, they can't help them. So therefore, it doesn't work. So all of your call center operatives have got access to the complete customer list. So how do you stop them exporting it? You give them permissions to export reports because that helps their job. But what you want to do is make sure they don't export any PII information. So being able to block that particular process is something that transaction security policies can do. And it's something that all of my customers, I highly recommend they should take. And having these policies in place will keep your data safe. Having the ability to use these events and understand what's happening inside your org over time, that's quite powerful. And that's where event monitoring can come into play. But transaction security policies are really there to block bad things from happening. You know they're bad by default. You shouldn't be exporting any private health information. You should not be exporting any private, personally identifiable information. Maybe things like credit card numbers shouldn't even be allowed to be put onto reports. These types of things. They can all be stopped by these transaction security policies. And that's something I would strongly suggest you should all investigate because that's something which will keep your data safe. Now, I'm nearly finished with my part of the presentation. If anybody's got any questions, please post them onto the LinkedIn post about this particular event, because that way we can see the questions and we can help answer them as we go through. So it's now time for me to hand over to Raul to take us through the next part of the session. Over to you.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for the wonderful presentation here. And as Doug mentioned, yes, please post your questions in the LinkedIn chat. We have got specialists here who are looking at your questions and they're very happy to answer them. We also have 15 minutes allocated at the end of this presentation to address your questions if they have not already been addressed through the chat. So moving on, we are going to talk about secure your data. So there's a lot of data that we have in Salesforce, especially. And a lot of this data is also, there's also a lot of personal information, whether you call it PII, PHI, or non-public information. There's a lot of that because, this is CRM system. And anytime we have personal information, there is a risk. It's kind of a liability, right? Because there's a chance of breach. There's a liability that the company is basically accepting. And if we look at one of these DNB reports over here, it's very interesting. If you look at it, they basically say that 30% of your data is relevant. So out of the all the data that you have, 70% is obsolete, and it's only 30% that we have which is relevant. And we have been data hoarders. I mean, that's like, because for the longest period of time, technologists have been told to do everything so that we never lose data, right? And that's the reason that we have a lot of historical data that is still sitting in our system, and now it's obsolete, but it's still sitting there. And because this data has a lot of PII, PHI, personal information, there is a liability, and that liability threshold just stays the same. And even though with time your data is becoming more and more obsolete, so you see this graph, like, your liability stays the same, but the value you are getting out of your data is kind of diminishing with time. And because of this, this 30/70 rule, you're also kind of, there's a hidden cost of this. The hidden cost is that you have too much data in your Salesforce, which slows it down, whether it's reports performance or even the page load performance. It's kind of slowing down everything. If you are thinking of implementing AI, infusing AI processes into your Salesforce, now you have so much data, and then when you send it to AI models, you have a bunch of different issues there as well. Number one is that, there is a cost to the tokens, and you're definitely paying a much more cost because you're processing more data, more tokens. The other is that, some of these uh, AI models also have limit in terms of how many tokens you can process. So let's keep digging a little bit more into this now that we say that 70% of the data is not good. But look at this, like, it's not just related to, it's not just the 70%. Now we are also replicating it. So I have got full copy sandboxes, I have got partial copy sandboxes, I'm data archiving it. I may have multiple Salesforce orgs, and I have seen a lot of customers where they basically integrate their Salesforce orgs, and you create a account in one org and it basically relays it to another org. So you are basically taking that 70% irrelevant data or obsolete data, and now you're basically, just proliferating that data. So you are compounding the problem. Now, what what should we do? So this is really the mantra. You want to collect less, which means that you definitely want to question what kind of data you are collecting. You want to remove the obsolete data, and you also always want to secure. So that's really the mantra, and lots of reasons for doing that. If I look in production, this is known as data retention. If I go to a website for a company and try to fill up a lead form, most of the responsible companies will put a data retention policy over there. So they will say that, after 5 years, after 7 years, if this has lost its purpose, we will remove the data. So it's also a legal thing that you want to remove it. And with the advent of GDPR in Europe and CCPA in USA, it is more and more important. And your internal audits will maybe raise a red flag on some of these things. So data retention is really the process where you are saying, hey, because I have got all of these leads and they are lost leads, or abandoned leads, and nothing came out of them, and they are 5 years old, let's remove out of the system. And that you're doing in your production system. And we'll deep dive into all of these things. The other thing, which is mostly on the secure side, is Shield platform encryption. And I know Doug talked about a bunch of different capabilities of Shield. We will also talk about the Shield platform encryption a little bit more in detail in the in the next few slides. Then we are going to be talking about AI chat GPT usage with your Salesforce data. So as much as, I think most of the customers, most of the people I talk to, I think they tell me that they have got a OpenAI chat GPT tab open in the browser. So people are like, copying information from Salesforce, putting it into chat GPT. And again, sort of, it is a data breach, because now your personal information is going from an authorized system to a non-authorized system. So we'll deep dive into this. On the sandbox data side, you have got sandbox data masking. So again, on the secure side, because what is going on is that you have PII, you have personal information in your production, and it gets copied to your sandboxes. And sandboxes, are not so, like, a lot of people have, God console, system admin kind of access to that. So we'll deep dive into all of these. But let's look at the data retention piece. So let's understand this part. So data retention, what you're seeing here is a cloud compliance privacy center screenshot. It's 100% on platform, available on App Exchange. But you want to think about retention, data retention. And when you think about data retention, whether you put up a manual process, which could be that you're just kind of once a month you run some report and you identify which are the contacts that have kind of passed the expiry date, they are obsolete, and then you find all the related information and you are removing all that information from your production. Or you can maybe buy a product like Privacy Center that automates all of this. But you see that when you're removing information from Salesforce, you have to think about a lot of things. One, it's not just a particular object, but it could be related objects. So if I have a contact and I know that it's a obsolete or a dormant contact and nothing is really going on with this contact, this account, it's not just the contact, it's assets and work orders and cases and case comments, and you want to kind of remove all this information. And sometimes it's not that easy, because you just can't go and delete this information, because you may have integration with other downstream systems, upstream systems, and you don't want to do that. Similarly, if you start deleting it, it can also change the numbers on cases. For example, if you start deleting cases, now suddenly your time to close and how many cases you closed, your historical reports will start to look different. So you don't want to do that. So the right approach to doing all of this is that you're actually masking these records in your production. And again, a product like Cloud Compliance Privacy Center can come very handy to do something like this. All right, so then moving on, let's talk about Shield, Salesforce Shield. So let's talk about what is the need for Salesforce Shield. So again, as Doug mentioned, there are three different products under Salesforce Shield. What we are talking about here is encryption at rest, or Salesforce Shield encryption. The way it works is that if I am an authorized Salesforce user, I am logged into Salesforce, whether it is production or my sandbox, and if I have got access to an object and access to records and access to specific fields, I would be able to see all kind of information, whether it's SSN number, it's email addresses, phone numbers, anything, whether there is shield or there is no shield. For an authorized person, whether I am looking from user interface, I am running sockles, or I am running report, I will see everything from my naked eyes. Because what shield is doing is shield is actually encrypting everything at the at rest, which basically means at the data center level, and which basically means that it's not your user where you are protecting it, it's really the data center person where you are protecting it. So really the business case for shield, at least encryption, is you're addressing a contractual or a legal requirement for specific use cases. So if you are a large bank and you have a regulatory compliance thing, and you have to make sure that all the data, customer data, is encrypted at rest, then you have to encrypt it using shield. So you know so the risk that it is not addressing is unmasked data in sandboxes and production data, and it is visible to anyone who has access. Now, moving on from this, here's a little bit more on the AI side. So as I mentioned before, that AI is here, and a lot of us are maybe experimenting with it, looking at it, and it's very powerful. You can write emails, you can summarize data, you can maybe automate your case root cause analysis. So automatically, when cases are getting resolved, closed, you're generating root cause analysis. If you have ton of email to cases, you're automatically identifying whether it's a case about billing, is it a case about installation, is customer happy. You can do sentiment analysis, ton of things you can do. But reality is that today a lot of organizations do not have AI running inside their Salesforce, and because of that, users are copying information and putting it out on ChatGPT. Maybe your network team has blocked ChatGPT, but then there are so many other variants. There's bard.google.com. There are so many other variants, and every day a new AI engine shows up, and it's available, and you can't block all of them. So the need of the hour is that we all have to figure out what AI use cases we have and what we want to use, and we have to give a secure way to our users so that they can actually use AI inside of Salesforce. Here is a report which is very interesting, and this is from Salesforce. So Salesforce published, and according to them, more than half of the generative AI adopters use unapproved tools at work, which is basically another tab and people copying data from Salesforce, pasting it in ChatGPT. Not a good idea at all, because if you read what ChatGPT is saying, or OpenAI, the parent company, They are saying that it's an explicit opt out, so you have to opt out of the training, which means that by default, any data that you are feeding to ChatGPT, they may use that data for the training purpose. If you do not want them to use it, then it's an explicit opt out. So my recommendation to all of you is that if you are using ChatGPT, please make sure you go to your account, your profile, and there's a explicit opt out. Please do that, just so that you know that your privacy is maintained and none of the information is used. With that, I'm going to also talk about GPT-5, which is a freemium app. It's available on App Exchange, and it's the it's a way to kind of safely use AI inside of your Salesforce. What it does is it has a multi-layered masking capability. So when you are sending information from Salesforce onto your choice of LLM, it basically masks all the information and then sends it to AI. And then when you get back the information, it unmasks it. So your end users are actually seeing information that makes sense to them. But from the LLM side or the AI side, AI is getting all masked information. So I would definitely encourage you to think about masking anytime you are integrating with AI, whether you build your own, whether you use GPT-5, and you're always trying to use your own model, because if you have your model, it's your rules. You control what is retained on the model, what is not retained on the model. And there are lots and lots and different AIs available here. And GPT-5 is available on App Exchange, and it's premium, so I would encourage that you give it a shot. All right, and here's the listing of GPT-5. And I believe that someone from my team might have posted a link. If not, then they should be. Moving on, let's talk about sandbox security. So we said that if you have real data, like we all have personal data in our production. Now when you refresh a sandbox, a full copy sandbox or a partial copy sandbox, all of that data is gets copied into your sandbox. So if we look at the data and kind of break it down as business data, unstructured data, more like files and all of attachments, there is also configuration data. And as much as we think that configuration data may not have personal information, reality is that when all the user information is part of configuration data, metadata, right? And all of that gets copied on every sandbox, whether it's a dev sandbox where you think there is no data, but there is all the user information. And if you have communities and you have your partner contacts logging into your production, all of their user information, maybe their IP addresses, maybe their phone numbers, email addresses, everything is getting copied into your dev sandbox as well. So if you just look through that, you will see that on the full and partial, I'm copying all of this data. And again, the problem really here is that when it's a sandbox, we have a lot of contractors, we have consulting companies, we have offshore partners who have complete access. They have system admin access on sandboxes, and there is no need for them even to look at real data. Like if there is a SSN number, there's no need for them to look at SSN number. So the right way to do that is that you are masking your full copy sandboxes, your partial copy sandboxes. And when you're masking them, you also want to be sure that you're masking with something which is more relatable. You don't want all the names to be ABC123, because if there's a lot of gibberish in your full copy sandboxes, partial copy sandboxes, it's very difficult for testers to test it. It's very difficult to people to kind of look at that data and really understand what it is. So you want to mask it in a fashion so that it's very realistic, but it's not real data. Similarly, in your dev and dev pro, your users get copied, your products get copied, your price books get copied. So again, sensitive information based on your nature of your business and how you look at it. Now, what do you do with this kind of problem? I mean, one option is that you can use data masker. Again, 100% on platform. It's available on App Exchange. Very, very fine grade control on it. You can define, what kind of operation you want. You can use regexes, you can use hard code, you can use Apex. Lots of control. So it's available on App Exchange. Again, someone from my team should put it out on the LinkedIn chat. Definitely you should think about, masking, whether you use data masker or not, whether you write your own, whatever you do, but leaving the door open on sandboxes and is not a good idea, because a breach is a breach, whether it happens in your production or it happens in your full copy sandbox. Your liability is the same. So it's definitely recommended, highly recommended, that you are masking your sandboxes. Here's how the listing looks like. And I am on improved security awareness. Back to my friend Doug over here. Doug, give me a minute here. I want to go mute so that my picture does not keep flickering while you are talking.
Great, thanks, Raul, and thanks very much all the people in the comments for asking questions around transaction security policies. I'm trying to answer them as we're going through, but I will actually get back to them towards the end of the presentation as well. So the last thing we're talking about here is improving security awareness, because this is something which is key to your environment. And if we go to the next slide, one of the things which um, people tend to do is have security awareness training. Now, the thing with security awareness training, it can be really very, very good, or it can be really very, very bad. One of the key tricks around security awareness training is don't try and do the yearly watch this video, which you can't click through. You've got to wait for the whole thing and then work out clicking on email links is bad. It doesn't actually enforce any security knowledge whatsoever. It's much better to actually give people alerts on things that they're doing at the point at which they're doing it. So, for example, if you go to share if you're using Office 365 or using Google Docs, when you go to share this externally, the system should go, are you really sure you want to do this? Because what you're doing is giving X, Y, and Z access to all this information. And that will sort of prompt people to make that uh, uh, connection in their mind about security. So what you should be doing is educating customers around what security is, not the mechanics of it, because in reality, if an email gets through and a user clicks on a link, that's not the user's problem. That's your system's problem, because it shouldn't let the email through in the first place. So what I'm saying here is you should be educating customers around security itself, not around the mechanics of security. You should be educating them around what security is, why is it important to them. For example, if you're in a company and you get data breached, there's a strong possibility if it's a small to medium sized company, it can shut the whole company down. So having a security issue at a small to medium sized company can make you lose your job because the whole company will go bang. Is that what you want? And so educating customers around that, educating employees around that is very important. And what you could also do is maybe introduce how people should be secure at home. Now, we've just finished all of the Christmas and Thanksgiving sales, but there's always sales happening all the time. And so people tend to get a little bit complacent about doing things securely online. One of my Most of my customers who have external facing websites are actually allowing like everybody to connect, and that makes sense because they want to have people to connect to their external environments. They can log in, log tickets, see what's going on, etc. But the majority of users that I've seen, external customers using communities, are using things like Windows XP or Windows 7 or even earlier machines than that, even things like Vista and that type of stuff. Now, with those operating systems, they're no longer being protected with patches from the vendor. So that means that particular user is at high risk of having that machine compromised if they go on the internet and do stuff. So what you should be doing as a good corporate citizen is actually alerting your end users outside of your company to say, hey, using Windows 7, that's a really old operating system and it's got these issues. We'd strongly suggest you should look at moving up to a more modern supported version and explain why. actually educate your users internally and externally around good cybersecurity. It's just a good thing to do for the whole world, just to make people more aware about security. And things like don't use debit cards when you go shopping, because if a debit card is scammed, then you can lose your money. If a credit card gets scammed, it's not your money, it's a credit card company's. And you can say it's not me, they've got to prove it was you, etc., etc. So in reality, credit cards are much more secure to spend online and in person than debit cards. And these types of things. So educate customers around security, and especially your boards. A lot of board members don't know much about security as well. So it's very important to get them up to speed. Now, Salesforce has some great trailhead pages on that, and we'll discuss those in the PDF later on. But definitely educating your users about security is key. Now, the next part is development team. So your internal development team, they should be doing secure code practices as part of a software delivery model. And they should be having a proper software delivery model. If you've got anything more complex than a couple of simple report changes, you should be using a proper DevOps process where you're using command line integration actually to take your code from sandboxes through to other sandboxes into production, et cetera, et cetera. You should be following that through. So DevOps process is very key. Salesforce has got an okay free product, which they have, but also there's other third parties out there who've got much more capable products, which also integrate security into the environment. And they can do things like they can alert you to the fact that you're deploying a change which will actually give everybody external access to the accounts object. And that means you probably get a good alert and say, actually, we shouldn't deploy this because it's going to cause a serious problem. And so having good security coding practices is key, but also you should review release notes for new security features. A while ago, Salesforce released the with security feature in Apex for SQL queries. And you should be using that. It's much better than the with sharing stuff. So with security is actually much better to use, and a lot of folks aren't using it because they didn't know about it. So make sure your development team keeps on top of current best practice, and make sure that you change your policies to keep everything up to date and make sure you're doing things appropriately when it comes to security. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll discussing this PDF, which we're giving you free of charge. This will be posted into the chat in the on the LinkedIn attached to this particular event. So you get a copy of that and you can have a look and go for your life and have a good understanding of actually what's happening there. And that means you'll be able to get some information from both myself, Raul, and Saurabh from Cloud Compliance with what we think are good things that you should be doing to keep your environment secure. So with that, if we go on to the next slide, we're talking about questions. Now, in the LinkedIn, I've been going through quite a few and talking about security, transaction security. A lot of folks here are actually looking at asking questions around that. And I know that Anna has got a couple of questions being posed, a lot of things. Srini have asked a couple of questions. So if I just do a quick overview again on what transaction security policies do. It's part of event monitoring, so you have to buy it. Event monitoring is part of the Shield suite, but you can buy it individually. So as Raul said earlier, I would suggest out of the Shield suite, you need two products, Field Audit Trail and Event Monitoring. You don't necessarily need platform encryption because Salesforce data is encrypted at rest anyway. And unless you have to control the key, don't worry about it. Your data is safe. You need to do stuff to protect your data from your biggest threat, which is internal users with access to your data. And that's where transaction security policies come in. There's two ways to build these things. One of them is very, very simple. It's point and click. You can do very simple things, and it's great for demos. So when I worked at Salesforce, I was demoing this really quite easily, and it was like, you can't export more than 100 contacts. Great demo, really works well. The challenge is you can get some smart person who goes, oh, I'll export 70 customers 400 times, and they get the whole environment, and you can't catch that in a policy. It's probably a lot better to actually classify your data. So each of your fields in your contact should be classified. So name is PII, email, PII, phone number, PII, mobile, PII. These are personally identifiable information fields. And if you flag them, because Salesforce allows you to flag every field with a data classification and a data sensitivity. If you flag these fields with appropriate levels and you have a complex policy similar to the ones I write and give to my customers, these policies allow you to use the metadata to control the policy. So the policy is just an Apex bit of code you deploy, that's it. Nothing's got to change. All you do then is classify your data and automatically the policy will take care of it. So you can easily do point and click policies, but they tend to be very blunt and they don't tend to be as good as you would like. It probably best to get more detailed, more complex policies, and that's where the ones that I write come into play. Now, you'd think that being able to check a field and see what classification it is would be very simple. Unfortunately, there's some issues with Salesforce internally that makes that quite challenging. I've managed to work around it. It took me nearly 3 or 4 weeks to get that worked out. I'm working with Salesforce to try and correct these issues, but it's not happened at the moment. So there's some interesting challenges around making this work properly. So what I will do is keep looking in this list to see what's in here. Any other questions? So Mary asked a question about doesn't remove export reports also force people to put data in Salesforce, making it more accurate? Um, I personally think that everybody should be able to export reports. The reason being, it makes their job a lot simpler. If you've got a marketing team who wants to take a bunch of contact information and then split it up into different groups by segmentation, they should be able to do that. And they can do that very securely by exporting a report that has the contact ID and maybe the total spend over the last couple of years. And then they can segment that information and then upload that back into a campaign. Now, you don't need to have the person's name and email address to do that. But if you have the contact ID, it allows you to do that. So I'm not sure, Mary, that stopping exporting reports causes people to put more data in. I think that might actually be the opposite sometimes. But there's something I really do think that people should be looking at around making sure that your Salesforce environment is secure and making things just work. Srini's got a question around how do you do AI security in Salesforce? So Saurabh, do you want to chip in on this one? Sorry, Saurabh or Raul, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, thank you, Doug. So as far as Salesforce security is concerned, like AI security in Salesforce, the way we look at it is that your biggest challenge is that number one, you have to give some way for your business users to use AI inside of Salesforce. If you don't do that, then they're copying and pasting it on a AI tool of whatever they like. So you definitely want to do that, number one. Number two, whatever tool you use or whatever you create your own integration, you definitely want to mask the data. So again, what Doug was mentioning, that at the field level you can go and you can tag it whether it's PII or not. And then you want to be sure that any information, if it's PII and if it's going to AI, then you're actually masking it. And once you get it back, then you're unmasking it. So those are two things that I can think of in terms of securing AI inside of Salesforce. The third thing you want to do it is, you want to do no retention. So when you go into any of these platforms like Azure, or like if you sign up Azure and you're running OpenAI there, then you can go there and again, in your preferences, you can tell that you don't want any retention, which means that then Azure will not retain any of the information that you are sending. So definitely you want to fire up your own LLM model inside of Azure. You want to make sure that either you are masking the information that you're sending, or you're using a product like GPT-5 that has its own security layer in place, and it makes sure that every data that is going out is always masked. I hope that I answered your question. Who was that? That was Srini. So any more question, guys? We still have 6 minutes.
I'm just doing a refresh as well to make sure we've got the most recent questions. I've actually just posted a link to um, a very good free product on the App Exchange called Authenticated and Guest User Access Report. This will actually let you know exactly who can see what data and how many records they can see. This tool is very, very powerful. I use it in all my assessments. It's a free tool. It's in the PDF that's going to be posted up here soon. That will make life a lot simpler for everybody else. Anna also mentioned org check. That works quite well. I would actually suggest that the guest user access reports also very useful. Anna also comments about Hyperforce encrypting your data at rest. That is true. It is done as well. You don't, and this is one thing Anna and a lot of other folks are saying shield. um, yeah, this shield component. So yeah, people tend to conflate platform encryption with shield, and that's not right. Shield is a brand. There are three products. So Anna rightly says that platform encryption is part of shield, so you don't need to buy that individually. Now, even if you're not in Hyperforce, your data is encrypted at rest in the Oracle database. So it's not documented in public yet. They can't say it's all encrypted. Hyperforce, everything's encrypted. But if you're running in a first party data center, your data is still encrypted at rest. So you don't have to really worry about looking at platform encryption. Um, what else are we looking at here? Looking through other things.
So yeah, so there's another question from Michelle Norton over here. She's asking to elaborate on Salesforce Trust Layer. So Salesforce Trust Layer is a part of Salesforce AI Cloud, and what it does is that it again kind of does the same thing that I was talking about. Like you bring your own model, whether it's OpenAI or whatever else, and then when you are sending the information to AI for processing, Trust Layer masks it, and then when you get it back, it unmasks it, and that's kind of the primary role. It also makes sure that there is no retention, and it also makes sure that if there is any biasness in it or any toxicity, it can highlight it to the business user. And it's kind of a similar thing at GPT-5. We have built the same layer, so you will find a lot of vendors who are trying to create similar kind of products as Salesforce AI Cloud, like GPT-5. I hope I answered your question, and Saurabh also shared, I see, a link on the chat with the a document that talks more about it.
No worries. Yeah. Also had a quick look here. Mary also commented about reports you were speaking about were accounts, leads, and contact lists, which allow people to track the status of a sale. Yeah, totally agree. If they put stuff into Salesforce, then that makes life a lot simpler and should be integrated as well to make life simple. Having a CRM is supposed to make your life easy. Having to go to multiple different systems to see your data is not good. Having it in one place and keeping it secure is something I strongly suggest. And Salesforce is a remarkably secure platform. Just need to make sure you do it properly. And that's some of the things we look at. So I would strongly suggest keeping things in Salesforce is a good place. Sticking it on a shared drive, not so much. So yeah, keeping things safe and secure is key. Um, Looking for any more questions? I can't see any. Has someone from the cloud compliance team also posted the PDF document that has all the freebies in here? If you could do that, that'd be fantastic. Oh, here we go. Yep, sure. I posted it 10 minutes ago. So this is the Secure Your Salesforce org for free PDF. Um, it's a good link. Just download it. Saurabh and myself and the rest of the team at Cloud Compliance, including Raul, worked on this together. So definitely have a look at this presentation. Please feel free to ask me more questions. We've got a couple of minutes left. I'll do one more quick search for questions to see what we can find.
I would have so liked if there was a way in LinkedIn to open it up and people can talk, but that's not an option because it just makes it more interesting when people ask their questions.
I totally agree. But I think we've probably got everything, and we're running up on the hour. So everybody, thanks very much for coming along. Really appreciate it from myself, and I'll let Raul wrap up at the end. But please keep asking questions in this post. We will put the video up here as well, so you will get a copy of this. And if you've got any further questions, please just yell on here. Please mention me or Raul or any of the cloud compliance team, and we'll make sure that we get back to you with an answer on that sort of stuff. So if you don't mention us, it may be a bit tricky for us to go through and find it. So please mention us, and we will come back and we will give you a definite answer. So thank you very much from Platinum 7
Yep.
and Doug Merritt. That's myself. And hand over to you, Raul, to wrap up.
Sure. Thanks a lot, everyone. Really appreciate it to join us here on this call. And I'm, as I mentioned, I'm all about AI, and that's kind of my passion. So if any question around how AI you can use inside of Salesforce, I am definitely interested. I can, interested to learn from you and maybe, share my thoughts on it with you as well. So reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions about using AI inside of Salesforce. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.